All right, good Saturday evening, everyone. Although you're probably going to be watching this on a day that's not Saturday evening, we're going to get into Numbers today. Our jaunt through the Bible so far has carried us through Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. You can find those videos on my YouTube channel, Swordmaster Publications. But there's quite a few other videos up there, and one of those that I've done is a video that is kind of a transition between those earlier books of the Bible and this one, and it's also kind of an apologetics video where I deal with a potential conundrum that a lot of people who challenge the Bible like to bring up, and it's the population growth. Genesis 46 talks about there being 70 males that go into Egypt, and here we're about to read about 600,000 something males that have come out of Egypt, and these are just counting those from 20 on up who are of fighting age, so it doesn't account those who are younger than 20 or those who are too old to go into battle. And so the actual population is probably closer to somewhere around 2 million. And how can we go from 70 males to 2 million people in that time? And that's what the video covers. So if you want to watch that, then that's also on the YouTube channel under Questions Answered. So we're going to actually get into the text of Numbers chapter 1 tonight. A lot of it is names and reading, and forgive me if I botch those names. I am not a native speaker, but I will do my best. But we're going to do some reading, and we're going to talk about the numbers, but there's not much in the way of just deep text here specifically, and that's the book of Numbers is kind of like that in a lot of places. It's a place where we're reading some history. It's a place where we're reading about their beginning of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness and that kind of thing. So not nearly as deep, although there will be places not nearly as deep as what we went into with Leviticus. And Leviticus, for me, was an amazing journey because it's the first time I've gone through it in a vocal way, or like as if I was teaching a Bible class or something. I've read it multiple times, but it's not the same thing. So being able to study it with you guys and going through it the way that I was able to go through it this time just really was a very, very cool experience for me, and so I appreciate you taking that journey with me. So let's begin with Numbers chapter 1 here, and it probably won't take an hour because it is going to be just a lot of reading and a little bit of comment here and there as we need to. So, all right, chapter 1, verse 1. And Jehovah spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt. So this is, they're still in Sinai, like, the mountain of Sinai, which, remember, if you understand the geography, there's the little jut of land. It's kind of a triangle where there's a river that goes up one way towards Egypt, and then there's another river that comes out and it goes more towards Palestine, and it's the far one, the one that's farthest from Egypt, that was the Red Sea that they crossed. And so they are actually in the Arabian Peninsula, and so Sinai is somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula, pretty close to where they crossed, but not like right next to where they crossed, but fairly close to it. And they've been there now for a little over a year. And so it's the first day of the second month that they are waiting. They haven't moved. They haven't gone anywhere. They haven't done anything. And Moses is in the tabernacle of the congregation. Now remember, the tabernacle of the congregation is the tabernacle where he sits outside of camp to make judgments. This is not the tabernacle, capital T, where the priests operate, and there's the holy place and the most holy place where they do all the sacrifices and stuff. That's actually in the center of camp. Moses is in the tabernacle of the congregation, which was erected for him outside of the camp for him to talk with God and to get instruction and those kinds of things. And it was a demonstration of God's separation from man, or man's separation from God because of his sin. God is holy, and so he spoke with Moses there. He gave the laws and advice and the things that he did to Moses there that were specific in terms of judgments that he had to give. But also remember that Moses spent 40 days up on Mount Sinai receiving the law. And so when we read about the book of Leviticus, the book of Leviticus is part of what he received. Now, also, like the latter half of Exodus, is part of that as well. The instructions on how to build the tabernacle, the instructions on the priestly vestments, the instructions on who could be a priest, and those kinds of things. Those are also part of those 40 days that he was up there. A lot of people, when they when they think about Moses up on the mountain of Sinai and receiving the law, they only envision him receiving 10 commandments. So 40 days, 10 commandments. Kind of a lot of wasted time. But that's not actually what was happening. He was up there and he got the 10 commandments, but he got a lot more than just 10. Those were just the first 10, and they were kind of think of it as a core rule book, and then you have a lot of other specific rules that came along with it, including the tabernacle, what it was supposed to be built like, and what the priestly vestments were supposed to be like, and how the sacrifices were supposed to go, and the rules for the bond servants, and all the things that we covered in the book of Leviticus and towards the end of Exodus. So there was a lot to cover in those 40 days that he was up there. So now we're in Sinai. We've had one full year to enact all of the things that God has had them enact, including those feast days. Remember, there were several feast days that they had to cover, including up through the Day of Atonement. And now they're in the second month of the second year, and it's the first day of that month. And so God is talking to Moses, not on Sinai, but in the tabernacle of the congregation. And so this is the instruction that he gives Moses at this time. It says, "Take ye the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel after their families by the house of their fathers, with the number of their names, every male by their polls." Now, this is not just a passing census. This is the law of how the Israelites were going to operate all the way down. And this is important because when we get to the time of Christ, all of these genealogies, all of the numbering and the census and who you were descended from, all of that was kept in legal records in the temple. And that's how you proved not only that you were from Abraham, but which tribe you were from, who you were descended from. That was the land properties, who got what land, and how that would go back to you in the year of Jubilee. These were official legal documents. And they were kept in the temple once the temple was built. And the problem with that is that when the Romans came in AD 70 and they destroyed the temple and burned it to the ground, took all the stones one off of the other, like Jesus said in Matthew 24 and the parallels in Mark and Luke, and they built that ramp up to Masada, all those legal documents were gone. And nobody could prove anymore, according to the law of Moses, who you were descended from. You couldn't prove you were descended from Abraham. You couldn't prove you were descended from Levi. You couldn't prove you were descended from Aaron. None of those things could be proved anymore legally. Now, they may have had their own family records, but those are not the same thing. And so this is God commanding the beginning of that census, that legal thing that determined all those, the land promises and all that. So anyway, let me turn my phone off here. I've got a buzz thing going on. So anyway, he says you're supposed to take the census, take the sum of all the congregation of the children after their families by the house of their fathers. Another important aspect is that when we talk about the lineages were through the father. The father had the authority under the Mosaic law, and even though we talk about genetically, the mother is kind of the dominant of the pairing of male and female. The DNA of the mitochondria and all of that are traced through the mothers. That's biologically, but authoritatively, it's through the fathers according to God. And that's because there's this higher spiritual aspect of things. And when we get into the difference in the lineages of Christ between Matthew and Luke, this becomes a thing, because in Matthew, we have a lineage that's different from Luke's. Matthew, who was writing to Hebrews, wrote the lineage of Christ through Joseph, the authoritative lineage of Jesus. But when we get over to Luke, Luke's a doctor, and he's writing to a more Greek audience, and they don't care about the Hebrew authoritative lineage. They care about the biological lineage. That's, who were you actually related to? And so we get the lineage of Mary, and both of those come together to show that Jesus was the descendant of David, which was very, very important. And there's a whole lot that goes into that. Some very, very powerful, specific prophecies and laws that culminate in Jesus because of all this lineage stuff. But when we talk about the house of their fathers, or the descending through the fathers and stuff, that's important in terms of the authority. So that's why this is a big deal here in verse 2. Then he says, from 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel, you and Aaron shall number them by their armies. Okay, so we're taking account of all of those who are military able. And with you there shall be a man of every tribe, every one head of the house of his fathers. In other words, this isn't something that Moses and Aaron just did by themselves, but they're actually going to take one head of a household, a representative from each tribe, to go around and do the counting with them. So it's not a solo thing, but it's something that could be verified with multiple witnesses. And these are the names of the men that shall stand with you. Okay, so God's going to call them out by name, these representatives by name. Of the tribe of Reuben, Eliezer, the son of Shadur. Of Simeon, Shelumiel, the son of Zurishaddai. Of Judah, Nashon, the son of Amminadab. Of Issachar, Nathaniel, the son of Zuar. Of Zebulun, Eliab, the son of Helon. Of the children of Joseph, of Ephraim. Now remember, Joseph got two half-tribes. So Joseph is like the primary tribe, and then Ephraim and Manasseh are the two half-tribes. He got a double portion because of all that he went through in his trials in Egypt. So of the children of Joseph, of Ephraim, Elishama, the son of Amihud, and of Manasseh, Gamaliel, the son of Pedazur. Of Benjamin, Abidan, the son of Gideoni. Of Dan, Ahiezer, of the son of Ammishaddai. And Shaddai there, if you remember, El Shaddai is one of the titles of God. So Ammishaddai, and the other one up here that we had, Zurishaddai. Those are both kind of referencing that. And then, of course, every time you see El at the end of a word, it's something of God. And I didn't go through and look up all these names. You can do that if you want. We're just naming off these people as they come up. Of Asher, Pagiel, the son of Ochran, or that might be Pagiel. I don't think they soften their G's with an I. So that might be Pagiel, the son of Ochran. Of Gad, Asaph, the son of Deuel. That E is pronounced there, Deuel. And so El, of course, being there at the end means something of God. Deu is probably duty, so the duty of God or something like that. Deuel. Of Naphtali, Ahira, the son of Enan. These were the renowned of the congregation, princes of the tribes of their fathers, heads of thousands in Israel. So these men weren't necessarily the patriarchs of that time. These were more like the captains, the experienced men who could stand as the leaders of the troops. So while we might have a patriarch, potentially too old to go into battle even, you have these men of each tribe who stand as the commander in charge of the military. And so that's the renowned, the princes, the heads of the army. The heads of thousands is a reference to these armies. So, and Moses and Aaron took these men, which are expressed by their names. So now God has given instruction to Moses in all of these verses, all the way through verse 16. That's God giving the instruction. And now verse 17 records them actually doing it. And Moses and Aaron took these men which are expressed by their names, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees. Their pedigrees, that's those genealogies. That's the important thing there for the Jews. After their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, by their polls. So this poll here is, we might think of like a census or a did you vote kind of thing. It's not a question of which one did you choose. Did you choose this side or that side? It's not that kind of poll, but it's more of an accounting type thing where they say, all right, this is the number based on what tribe you're in. But note how important this is here. The pedigree, the genealogy, the family, all of those things are super, super important. And so when we read about the Jews, by the time we get to the New Testament, you can really see how much stock they put into what family they're from and their bloodline and their physical nationhood. The Jews were major bigots. They anybody who wasn't a Jew, they looked down on. Even half Jews, like the Samaritans, they looked way down on them because from Numbers especially, and of course dealing with Levi with the priesthood and all of that, it was so important what bloodline, what genealogy you came from, and it was ingrained in them because of the way that the land was divided among them, and how it couldn't really depart from them permanently. If you had a land grant based on the dividing up of the land at this time, and when we get into like Joshua and whatnot, the way that they divided up the land was permanently part of your family. So you had to prove that you were part of this family. And that's why this idea of genealogies was so important. In the New Testament, it says genealogies aren't important, that they're pointless. He talks about stop debating pointless genealogies because it doesn't matter anymore. The promise was to keep Israel preserved until Messiah could come. And once Messiah came, the promise was fulfilled. The contract was done. And God had fulfilled it completely for the purpose that the contract had been made to Abraham. And when he did that, all of that stuff was done with. The land promise, the Jubilee, all of that stuff didn't matter anymore. They weren't part of God's law anymore because all that stuff got nailed to the cross. Everybody clamoring today. I'm watching through a video of a man that I've kind of been watching off and on as an apologist for over 20 years. He's got some really good science. His theology is awful, but his science, his apologetics when it comes to like Genesis and creation science is really good, and he's a pretty funny guy. And I keep hearing him talk about he's trying to go through Revelation right now, and he probably should have studied it a little bit more, but as he goes through it, he keeps talking about how Israel is going to get their land back. No, they're not. They're not going to get those land promises. Even if you go now to the nation of Israel, they don't have a legal way to claim the land portions that God gave them according to their tribes. Now, there's people over there right now, and they may or may not be descended directly from Abraham, and that's great. I'm not saying they can't have whatever land is rightfully theirs or not, but to say that they're of a specific tribe and they get a specific land because of this misconception that they're still God's chosen people, they're missing the purpose for which they were chosen. They were chosen out of the world to bring Christ into the world and bless the whole world. And they, mission accomplished. They did what they were supposed to do, and then they murdered him, and then God took them out, just like he promised he would do in Leviticus 26 that we studied. And so, all of this that we're reading now, very, very important to them to preserve them, but it doesn't matter today. All right, verse 19. And Jehovah commanded Moses, so he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai, And the children of Reuben, Israel's oldest son, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, by their polls, every male from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. We're going to read that a lot. Like, that's repeated so many times. But it's very, very specific because God is emphasizing how important this is for them. When God repeats things, it's because people are usually probably too stubborn to get it the first time. It's not that it's more important or less important than anything else that God says, but it's a repetition for the hard of hearing and the people who might just kind of let it slip by or whatever. So it's super, super important that he repeats this because it was important for the Israelites to get how important this was. And so he's going to repeat this for every tribe. Those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Reuben, were 46,500. 46,500. Just the soldiers, just the male soldiers. And that's one tribe. We got 11 more to go. Of the children of Simeon, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, those that were numbered of them, according to the number of the names, by their polls, every male from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. So what's being taken here? The names. The names are being recorded officially, and the genealogies that came from those names. Okay, who are you? I'm of the tribe of Simeon. Okay, their names go all the way back to Simeon, and then from that day forward, they added to the genealogies after this man. Oh, you survived. You had children. Okay, their names go after yours, and then they have children. Oh, those grandchildren go after. And it goes all the way down for the next 1,500 years. For the next 1,500 years, of course, before that, Assyria comes in and takes out the 10 northern tribes. And so they are kind of struck out of the legal system. That way, they lose their land promise. They lose all of their land and everything because Assyria comes in. But Judah, Benjamin, and Levi continue in the same way, that they keep adding those names to those genealogies. And it says, every male from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Simeon, were 59,300. So 59,000 from Simeon. It's crazy numbers here. Of the children of Gad, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Gad, were 45,650. Of the children of Judah, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the numbers of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Judah, were 314,000. That's 60. 60, and 14,000. So that's 74,600. It's a big family. Of the children of Issachar, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Issachar, were 54,400. Of the children of Zebulun, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. You see why people have trouble reading through some of these parts of the Bible. It's repetitious. And when they read that and they don't understand the purpose of the repetition, each of these statements here is so very important. The word generations, by their generations. Why is that important? Because we're talking about the genealogy. How did you get all the way back to Abraham? That's why it's generations. After their families. Why is this important? Well, because we're dealing with all of the connections here that they had biologically. We're dealing with mothers, and we're dealing with sisters, and we're dealing with daughters. We're dealing with grandfathers and fathers and brothers and sons. All of these things are important. By the house of their fathers. Why does that matter? The house of their fathers is that authority aspect of things. They're not done according to the mothers, they're done according to the fathers. How is the genealogy of Christ listed forevermore and always? In the book of Matthew, by the house of his father, Joseph, his earthly father. According to the number of the names there are the individual person. Why did their name have to be recorded in the census? Because it all goes through that list of names down to wherever they happen to be in history. And then from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Why? Because they were going to be a military nation. They were going to be going into the promised land, and they were going to be going in to conquer. And so they needed to know how many people they were going up with. God told them to do that. So of the children of Zebulun, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Zebulun, were 57,400. Now here we come to Joseph. Remember, he gets 2. Of the children of Joseph, namely of the children of Ephraim, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Ephraim, were 40,500. So 40,000 is half of Joseph. Of the children of Manasseh, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of their names, or of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Manasseh, were 32,200. So 40,500, 32,200, you're looking at 77,700. And not quite as much as Judah, if I remember correctly. Judah had slightly over Judah, because he had 74,000. 74,600, 77,700 for Joseph. So Joseph has the biggest part in that he has 2 half-tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. And then of the children of Benjamin, remember Benjamin was the youngest son by a lot, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Those that were numbered of them, even in the tribe of Benjamin, were 35,400. Not quite as much as some of the other families, although not the smallest. I think there was one that was 32. Of course, Manasseh doesn't count because he's a half tribe of Joseph. It's one generation removed. 54, that's Judah. 45, 59, 40, and 6. So yeah, so he's the smallest of so far of Judah's children. Of Jacob's children. But Manasseh is the smallest, but he's a generation removed. He's one generation after Benjamin. Manasseh was Benjamin's nephew. So a little bit of difference here. It's just me, the math nerd, playing with these numbers in my head. There's not that big of a deal of looking at the difference here. But Benjamin had 35,000. So far, he's the smallest that's been listed. Notice also that Benjamin is not listed last, even though he was the last born. Of the children of Dan by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old upward, all that were able to go forth to war, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Dan, were 60, that's 60, and 2,000, so 62,700, a huge number, and that's important later on. We'll talk about this more when we get into them actually crossing into the promised land. Of the children of Asher by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Asher, were 41,500. And of the children of Naphtali, throughout their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the numbers of their names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Naphtali, were 53,400. These are those that were numbered, which Moses and Aaron numbered, and the princes of Israel, being 12 men, each one was for the house of his fathers. So in other words, these 12 guys were like the commander of each of those sets of men that we just numbered off. So were all those that were numbered of the children of Israel, by the house of their fathers, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war in Israel. Even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,000, so 603,550 men. Again, 603,550 men from only 70 that came in Genesis 46. And these are all those who were 20 years old and upward that were able to go forth to war. That's a lot of people. So go watch my other video and talk about how that's possible to go from 70, and because they only did it in about 230 years, and they only did it in about 4 generations. It took them 4 generations to go from 70 to to the 2 million that they're at right now, the 2 million that came out. And I think when I was doing my earlier videos in Exodus, I actually think I said 600,000, but I was remembering this number from the book of Numbers in my head. I was not remembering correctly. I had stated inaccurately there was 600,000 people. It was actually 600,000 men 20 and older that could go to war. It's actually about 2 million that came out of Egypt. So I think I was inaccurate about that, just because I was remembering this particular number at the time. All right. Now, note one other thing here. Verse 47, but the Levites after the tribe of their fathers were not numbered among them. Why? Because Levites didn't go to war. The Levites were part of the priesthood. They were spiritual. Their focus was on the spiritual things. They had other responsibilities. Levi never went to war. For Jehovah had spoken unto Moses, saying, only you shall not number the tribe of Levi, neither take the sum of them among the children of Israel. But you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle. Because remember, this was for going to war. You shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of testimony. Not the tabernacle of the congregation, but the tabernacle of testimony. And over all the vessels thereof, and over all the things that belong to it, they shall bear the tabernacle and all the vessels thereof, and they shall minister unto it, and shall encamp around about the tabernacle. Understand, this initial census here was to find out who all could go to war. There is a broader numbering where everybody gets included, particularly the Levites get included in that, because they need to know who's descended from Aaron, because only the sons of Aaron, the descendants of Aaron, could be priests. And so don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. This census here is just an initial census to get how many people were able to go to war. But when we talk about the genealogies, and we talk about the fathers, and we talk about the names, those are all important to the Israelites because of the way that the land promises were distributed. And that we're going to cover that here in Numbers, and we'll talk about it probably for the rest of the Old Testament, how those land things were distributed and who they belonged to and how that all worked out. So but you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of testimony, and over all the vessels thereof, and over all the things that belong to it. They shall bear the tabernacle and all the vessels thereof, and they shall minister unto it, and shall encamp round about the tabernacle. So you had at the center of the camp the tabernacle of testimony. Then you had the Levite people, the tribe, around it, camping around it in their own personal tents and with their families, and divided up the way they were divided up. And then around the Levites, you had the 12 tribes, and I say 12 because Manasseh and Ephraim counted as the 12 tribes there. Levi was not counted among the 12 tribes. That's like when we talk about the split kingdom. There's 10 northern tribes and 2 southern tribes. We don't ever count Levi in either of those countings, but actually the southern kingdom had 3 tribes. It had Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, but Levi doesn't ever get counted in anything because their focus is the priesthood and the tabernacle, and then later the temple. And so when we get to the time of Christ, Levi's still around. When we get to the time of Christ, none of those northern 10 tribes are there, including Manasseh and Ephraim. They're gone. All right. Verse 51, and when the tabernacle sets forward, the Levite shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is to be pinched, the Levite shall set it up. Who gets to do all this? The Levites. Does anybody else get to do it? No. Did God say nobody else? Did God mention any other tribe in this instruction? No. He specified the Levites. What would have happened if somebody who was not a Levite tried to help? Same thing that happened to Uzzah when he touched the ark. When he tried to study the ark, when David was bringing it back to put it in the temple where it was supposed to go, Uzzah reaches out, touches the ark, kills him. Why? Nobody's supposed to touch the ark. Why? Because God specified that it was supposed to be carried on the poles. Only the Levites are instructed to put the tent up, or the tabernacle up, and to take it down. By specifying, God eliminates everything else. That's the way God thinks, the way God commands us. When God specifies, we do not, in our arrogance, have the authority to go beyond what God has specified. And I'll bring this back again to mechanical instruments, or we could talk about the Lord's Supper, or anything that you want. God specified in the New Testament that we sing. It is arrogance to add mechanical instruments to what God has specified. You're saying, I know better than God how God wants us to worship God. And same thing with the Lord's Supper. Who, in their arrogance, would add anything to the Lord's Supper other than the fruit of the vine and the unleavened bread? Who would add milkshakes and hamburgers and make it into a meal when God specified that it should be the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine? That's sheer arrogance on our part. God specified that's the end of it. God specified who should be in authority over congregations. He was very specific. If a man wants to be a bishop, an elder, if somebody's going to be a shepherd over a congregation, it's got to be a dude. It's got to be married, one wife. His children have to be Christians. And all of those things that are listed in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, those are specifications. God says this is what the man has to have if he wants to be the leader of the congregation. And if you don't fit those specifications, you aren't qualified. Why? Because God specified what was necessary to be qualified. That eliminates everything else by being specific. And it's just, again, that's how God thinks. And so when God specified here, the Levites shall take it down when we're ready to move and put it back up when we come into a place. He specified the Levites. Everybody else is automatically eliminated. And they face the death penalty if they went beyond that. Just so they would understand God meant business when he specified something. And then he says, and the stranger that comes near to the tabernacle, okay, they weren't supposed to come inside that inner ring of Levites. They couldn't come past the Levite camp to the tabernacle. And we're going to read about that happening eventually as well. People try to bring foreigners, foreign women and whatever to the tabernacle, and they get killed for it. Stranger that comes nigh shall be put to death. It was an interesting thing when we read about Rahab, Ruth, in the book of Ruth. Ruth was a foreign woman, and she is in the lineage of David. Well, David writes a psalm that says that he counted it a joy when they said, come, let us go up to the tabernacle, to the tabernacle, to worship God. Why? Because David was the 10th generation. Maybe it was Rahab. Maybe it was Rahab the harlot. Because it was 10 generations, but no, it couldn't have been Ruth, because Ruth was like 4 generations back. Because it was like Obed, and then Ruth's husband, and then another man, and then Jesse, and then David. So it was 4 generations. Anyway, I should have looked it up beforehand, but it just occurred to me, so I'm saying it to you now. But anyway, David was 10 generations from a woman who was not an Israelite, and so the strangers could not approach to the tabernacle, and you were considered a stranger, even if like, let's say one of your parents was a foreigner and one of your parents was not, you were considered a foreigner up into 10 generations. And so David was the first generation who was considered fully Hebrew, and he was able to go to the tabernacle and worship because he was no longer considered a foreigner. And so that's why he wrote the psalm, is I counted it joy. I'll have to look that up, and I'm sure we'll study it when we get to it. I just can't remember the names right now and how that works out. But strangers are not supposed to approach. If they did, they got stoned, or they got put to death. Verse 52, and the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, every man by his own camp, and every man by his own standard throughout their hosts. And they're going to talk about this next chapter. And my mom's actually sent me a graphic that she had constructed about what this looked like. So I will probably try to edit that picture in as we go through it and talk about it when we get to it. But it says, but the Levites shall pitch around the tabernacle of testimony, that there be no wrath upon the congregation of the children of Israel, and the Levites shall keep the charge of the tabernacle of testimony. So what is this wrath? They were supposed to pitch their tents around the tabernacle to keep the wrath from coming upon the congregation of the children of Israel. They didn't want anybody near trying to come in and help when they were putting it up and taking it down. And so the Levites would come and they would pitch their tents around the area to keep everybody else out, and then the Levites were in charge. So I'm telling you, God specified the Levites. And so this camping around the tabernacle of testimony was a protection so that nobody would go beyond what God specified. Okay, in verse 54, and the children of Israel did according to all that Jehovah commanded Moses. So did they. So they did it. They obeyed. And there is a lot to be said about obedient faith. When God talks to them, there are a lot of times where we read where Moses did all that Jehovah commanded, or Aaron did all that Jehovah commanded, or the children of Israel did all that God commanded. God is pleased with obedient faith, has always been pleased with obedient faith. That has never changed. Still, obedient faith is what God requires. It's just under a new covenant. We aren't trying to be saved by works of the law of Moses. In fact, if we try to justify ourselves by the law of Moses, we are fallen from grace, according to Galatians 5:4. And you can start in verse 1. Galatians 5:1 through 4 has a really good, just straight up Paul telling people, don't try to be justified by Moses because it can't save you. It can't be saved by works of your own. You can't come up with things and say, God, I did this, you owe me salvation. That's works of merit or works of earning, or you're trying to make a bargain with God according to what you have done, saying, God, you owe me. I have something of value to offer you, and so you owe me salvation. Let's exchange my works of merit for the salvation that you're offering. Can't get saved that way. There's no way to be saved by works of merit or works of self-righteousness. Obviously can't be saved by works of the devil either. But you know what God does require that you can't be saved without? Works of obedient faith. You see, those works of obedient faith, they don't have value in and of themselves. They have value that God has assigned to them because he commanded them to be done. When I hear the gospel, when I'm sitting there studying the gospel, I'm listening to the gospel because God has commanded me to do that, there's nothing inherent in me hearing words and understanding what God has to say. There's nothing of meritorious value in that. I don't have anything to offer God. It's not me trying to exchange things of equal value. I'm just doing what God told me to do because God is my master, and I am an obedient servant. And the same thing with the faith, the belief. Belief is a work, John 6:28 and 29. They asked Jesus, what do we do to work the works that God has given us to do, the works of God? And Jesus said, well, the works of God that you should do is believe on me. That's what he said. But faith is a work. It's a work of obedience. It's not a work of merit. It's not a work of the old law. But it's something that God requires of us. Same thing with confession and repentance. Those are things we do, actions we take. They're acts of obedience. They're not acts of merit. They don't have intrinsic value. They only have the value that God has given them by virtue of commanding them to be done. And so anybody says, well, you're just trying to earn your way to heaven by doing works. Not these kinds of works. These works don't have intrinsic value assigned to them. And for you to keep claiming that means you don't understand the position that you're arguing against. No member of the Church of Christ argues ever that we earn our way to heaven, that our works somehow are payment for anything. They don't have intrinsic value, but they are demanded by God. And so when we talk about being baptized into Christ, which is the most passive of all the things that God commands us to do, be baptized is a passive thing. Hearing is active. Believing is active. Confession is active. Repentance is active. Those are things that I actively do. But when I talk about, it's not the baptizing, it's the being baptized. It's something done to me. The only action I take is submitting myself to baptism. It isn't a work that I'm earning anything. It doesn't have intrinsic value. It only has the value that God has given to it by virtue of it being commanded. And it's almost to the point, I've been arguing this for 30 years since I was old enough to take up the sword and begin to discuss these things with people, that it's a point of frustration for me that people don't get that they don't. It's like they willfully refuse to understand that there's a distinction between the kinds of works, that there isn't an intrinsic value in what I do. The only value that there is in obedience to God is that God has told me I've got to do this. Hebrews 5:9 says that he is the author of eternal salvation for them that obey him. If you love me, keep my commandments. And then he says in places like Mark 16:16, he that believes and is baptized, immersed, shall be saved. It's explicit. 1 Peter 3:21, the antitype, whereunto immersion does also now save you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Not because H2O has any magical or mystical or miraculous properties to it. It's just water. But because by submitting to that, God says that's the point where you are buried as my son was buried, and your old man dies, and you contact the blood of my son, and you are transformed into a new creature spiritually. You are reconciled to me, and you are in the body of Christ when you come up out of that water as a new creature. That's what God says. And it's not something I came up with, because that idea has been around for 2,000 years. It's not something that I came up with, so I didn't devise it. And it's not something that has any kind of merit to it. It's not. There's no way that me going down into some water and coming back up is equal to the value of a human life or soul. And so please understand, as you watch this video, the nature of obedient faith. The works that James is talking about is a different kind, a different species of work than the kind that Paul is wanting to talk about in the book of Romans and all over the place. Most of the time when Paul is talking about works, he's talking about works of the law, works of merit, works of earning. But when James talks about it, that you're not able to be saved by faith alone, he's talking about you can't be saved without works of obedience. Because if you say that faith alone saves you, then you are arguing that you're saved by a dead faith. Because that's what that's exactly what James teaches. And so, please understand that this is the way that God has always operated. Verse 54, the children of Israel did according to all that Jehovah commanded Moses, so did they. And I would like, if one day I'm dead and gone, and somebody decides to bury me in a graveyard somewhere, I hope that it can truthfully be put on my tombstone. And Ernie did according to all that Jehovah commanded him. So did he. That'd be the best thing that could go on my tombstone. So anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you for tuning in. We'll try to get to Numbers 2 when I can. I'm a little bit slower paced now because I'm having to work. I've got a lot of stuff going on during the week, and so I'm kind of at a slower pace, but I may try to pick back up here and do a few more per week than one or two that I've been doing. But anyway, we'll see you guys next time.